Hello again, friends, and welcome to the final episode of the Haunting of KGGO.com for the year of 2020. My name is B-sox. I'm your host during this little venture into the world of the unknown and the paranormal and the things that go bump in the night. As we wrap up this season, we've got a very special guest on the line with us, and usually it's like, hey, they're the founder of this paranormal group or whatever. I don't know if he has one or not, or if it's just he is the man, the myth, and the legend, Josh Hurd. What's going on, man?
What's up, brother?
So do you actually have a group, or is it just Josh Hurd Productions?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just like me kind of, I don't know, I like to call myself like a paranormal free agent. You know what I mean? Like I just kind of go where I'm needed, I guess. Like whoever wants to put up with me for the night, like can.
When you said I go where I'm needed, I just pictured you as like a cowboy.
Yeah. I like to feel like I'm a cowboy sometimes. I have a hat. I don't wear it well, but yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Josh Hurd is on the line with us. Josh is a paranormal investigator, filmmaker, author. You go out and do lectures and all kinds of crazy stuff. We'll try and get into as much as possible. I'll tell you right now, if you need to know anything about him, just head to his website, joshhurd.net, correct?
Yeah, that's it, man.
Cool, and we'll have links to the social media pages and all of this stuff at the bottom of the page. But Josh, as we dive into this, I always like to start here because I always think it's an interesting story, and I think it's about different for everybody. How did you get into this weird, wacky world of the paranormal? What was it that drew you in, and you're like, you know what? Yeah, let's do this.
I had lost an uncle when I was like 12 years old.
Okay.
And I was just kind of at that weird age where you're just finally able to understand kind of like the finality of death, right?
Yeah.
And he was quite young. I mean, he was only 31 when he passed away. So this was like a big shock to the family and all of that. And there was some weird things that happened to us, like as a family, like surrounding his death, and like it was those like experiences that really got me asking like the bigger question. It's like, okay, there's something else going on here that we're not quite privy to, right?
Okay.
And so that's when I kind of went down the rabbit hole, so to speak, right? I started reading like parapsychological studies, and I started reading the works of like Hans Holzer and Ed and Lorraine Warren and all of this weird stuff that, I mean, you probably shouldn't be reading at 12 and 13 years old.
It's fine. But he's a well-adjusted young man.
Maybe. Or either that or there's something very wrong with me. But honestly, like that's what I did. Like I just kept reading everything that I could, consuming as much information as I possibly could. And then it wasn't until I was in like college, really, that I found like-minded individuals. Like here I am in a town of about 300 people, like growing up and all that stuff. It's like, I'm not just going to go out there and be like, hey, let's go look for ghosts, because people are going to think I'm completely off my rocker, right?
I know you say that, but I have, it's a story for another time, but I know exactly what you're talking about. That's not the opening line during the first couple days of knowing somebody.
Right, exactly. So yeah, man, I mean, it wasn't until college that I really, started to kind of get into it and go out and actively pursue this stuff.
What was it that got, because you said, weird things were happening around the family. What were those weird things? Like, what made you go, okay, there's more to this?
The first thing that really happened, my whole family is sitting around this dining room table in my grandparents' house.
Okay.
My grandparents being the parents of my uncle, right? And my grandfather was telling us the story basically of Uncle Todd's final moments. And it was emotional,
Yeah.
And so as we're sitting there, we're just kind of like taking this in and crying and comforting one another. And there's this staircase that's right off their dining room. It leads upstairs. And the only thing really upstairs is like a toy room area for the kids. And this toy radio comes tumbling down the stairs, slides onto the floor. And it was one of those toy radios that are like the wind-up thing, and it'll play for 30 seconds or what have you. And it slides onto the floor and it starts playing this song, and it was Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which was also like one of Uncle Todd's favorite songs. It was played at his funeral. I mean, all of this like symbolic stuff going on in just a matter of moments. And I mean, nobody said a word. We just kind of looked at one another and kind of generally understood that was him. like saying, hello, I'm okay. And so like that was the first thing for me. And then of course, surrounding the death of a family member is usually like, okay, there's a lot of family going on right now and just like too much. And so I had to remove myself from the equation because I just wanted some time by myself.
Yeah.
And I went home, which I only lived like a block away from my grandparents. So I'm at home, I'm walking around our living room, and I get like instantly cold, just frozen cold, like the hair, standing up and all of that stuff. But it was the smell that hit me. And it was it smelled like his cologne, which I don't even know what cologne he wore. It was a very distinct smell. I'm not even sure if they still make it. I smelled his cologne. Now, whether this was actually him, like saying hello to me, or whether this was my brain, because of all of the grief and the dramatic sense of loss that I was feeling, if that was my brain tricking me. But to me, this was very real. To me, it was him.
Yeah.
And I just said his name, and then pretty much the moment had passed. It was done and over with. And that was really it for me. That was kind of like what tipped it right over into, okay, now there's definitely something going on here. Right? That wasn't just some coincidental thing. That was a very big moment for me.
Josh Hurd is joining me on the haunting of KGGO.com. You can find out more about him, joshhurd.net. We'll have the links at the bottom of the page. So you have this kind of just being dumped into the world of the paranormal, it kind of sounds like. Things started happening. Did the family, did the place you were living at, was there ever any of that ghost stories before that, or was it all after?
No, I mean, it was pretty much all after.
Okay.
Like, when I was little, I was always the weird kid. Like, I was always the kid that was like reading books on like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and UFOs and all of that stuff. And all my friends are like reading stupid like Berenstain Bears books and all that lame stuff. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But like, I was like just me doing my thing, you know what I mean? So I guess I've always had like an interest in that vein of everything. But yeah, it was just weird, man, how everything kind of just happened.
So you move on to actually, going back to the radio coming down the stairs. Looking back on that now, if you knew a little bit more at the time, how would you investigated something like that?
Oh my gosh! See, and that was my first instinct. Obviously, was because I'm very analytical anyway. Like I like to come at the paranormal in a serious manner, but man, I like to have a lot of fun too. Right?
Yeah.
But like at the same time, it's like I'm very analytical, and so I'm looking at this, and I'm like, okay, somebody was upstairs. One of the kids or whatever was upstairs, and it fell out of this, maybe a toy box or something like that, or somebody kicked it by accident, whatever. Something happened. But then nobody was upstairs. I'm like, nobody was remotely upstairs. Like, quite literally, everybody in that house was around that table. Like, everybody was accounted for. And so, like, going about it, like, investigating, like, that obviously was, the first question out of my brain. But like at the same time, it's like I don't have an explanation for any of it.
It just drives you nuts sometimes, doesn't it?
It absolutely kills me, yes.
You have something that happens and you're like, I don't know, because there was something that happened to me that I tried for like 2-3 hours the next day to try and recreate it. I couldn't get it to do it, Right. So having something as big as the radio tumbling down the stairs while everybody's around and it playing a certain song, that's crazy.
And see, that's what I thought too. And I'm like, I could maybe account for the fact that radio could have played that song because it only plays that song, right? Yeah. And it could have played that song because it fell down the steps and maybe was jarred just enough to play that song. Yeah. You know what I mean? It kind of knocked the gears into motion or what have you. I'm like, I could totally hop on board with that. How the hell that got down the steps, I'll never know.
It's like the anime where the guy pulls out the sword, cuts up everybody's armor, and it doesn't fall off until he puts his sword away.
Yeah, dude, yes.
Josh Hurd joining me on the haunting of KGGO.com. So you get to college, you start talking to like-minded people or people that are at least, more in kind of your lane of this stuff. Where did it go from there?
I mean, from there, it was basically like, it was kind of this time of year anyway, right? Like right around the Halloween season. And that's pretty much when this stuff is getting the most press. And so in the local newspaper, I went to Northwest Missouri State University. And so like we're reading this newspaper about this old place called Workmans Chapel, which is like this old rundown church. It looks more like a barn, honestly.
Wow.
And it fell into disuse in the 1950s, and hasn't really been touched since. And it was this weird story that we were reading about Workmans Chapel and all the ghosts that supposedly haunted. I'm like, let's go out there. It's 10 minutes away. Let's cruise out there.
Josh, let me ask you one question real quick, because I think this is kind of interesting. When about was this?
This was the early 2000s.
Okay, so
when this was going on, yeah.
The reason I ask is because you hadn't had like that influx of everybody wants to be a ghost hunter because the show was on.
No.
Okay,
no,
cool.
Not yet. Now I will say around that time, that I forget exactly when that show aired first out of the gate, and of course we watched a couple episodes of that.
Yeah.
After everything was kind of said and done, and we watched 4 episodes and thought we knew everything there was to know about, paranormal investigating and all that stuff. But it was interesting.
2004.
Like, is that when it came out? So
yeah, Ghost Hunters TV series 2004.
Okay. So, I mean, this was probably 02, 03, probably.
Yeah.
So it was just before.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, because there's kind of a thing where up until that point it was kind of it was, I don't want to say taboo, but that's the closest word I can kind of come up with it, to kind of be into this stuff. And then once everybody watched Ghost Hunters, everybody's like, hey, I'm going to get me some black T-shirts and we're going to have a group.
And off we go.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
it's funny too, because like a lot of those teams that just kind of spring up, right? Like out of nowhere. I'm not saying they're doing bad work or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, not every bump and creak and mouse fart is a demon. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, there are most likely a reasonable explanation for the majority of these things that happen to us.
That's right, Zach Baggins. Did you hear that? Anyways,
oh, please, don't get me started.
Okay, so you guys decide to go check out this old church. Looks like a barn, 10 minutes away from you, and news story that supposedly it's haunted, which it had to be a gag piece from that newspaper, right?
Most likely, right? And so we get there and we're like, okay, supposedly there's this little girl that runs around this adjoining cemetery that's right by the chapel.
Okay.
We never encountered her, whatever. We went into the chapel, I mean, like for 4 consecutive nights did this. And the first 3 nights, there was little bumps and creaks and things like that, most likely a bat or a mouse or something, I don't know.
Yeah. Nothing
really to write home about, right? It was the last night that we showed up. Obviously, we pull up, and as you're looking at this structure itself, imagine like an old barn with a very large opening in the front, 3 windows on either side, and then 2 windows in the back. You can still see the haze of Maryville off in the distance through this structure because the windows are gone. It's just the frames themselves. But it was that night in particular that I remember walking up towards the chapel and not being able to see inside of the structure. It was very, very odd. Like, it was quite literally blacker than night. And so that kind of threw me for a loop, right? Because obviously it was like, well, this is something that I haven't experienced before. This is something that I also hadn't read about. And it was that night that our friend, Tiffany, she was crouched down in the front. Again, we hadn't even walked inside, but she was crouched down at the front, very similar to like a catcher in baseball.
Yeah.
And she was commenting on the fact, like, I can't believe how black it is. And before she even could fully get that sentence out of her mouth, she was struck by something. And imagine yourself sitting in a chair. Your legs extend out from your body. Your arms extend out from your body. Like, you're quite literally in a 90-degree angle.
Yeah.
And she flies backwards, probably 3 feet,
Whoa.
Hits on her butt, does 2 backwards somersaults over herself, and is laying face down, like on this gravel, basically.
I shouldn't laugh, but it's a funny image.
No, but it is, because like it's really strange, because obviously never had experienced anything like this.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, that right there was, ultimately took the work of a priest to rectify the situation. Like, we had a lot of knowledge come at us in a very short amount of time, just because we had to. We needed to help our friend. This was a bad deal for sure. But that's when I realized, I'm like, okay, as fun as this is, as much fun as we have with all of this, there are things out there that don't necessarily wish us well.
Yeah.
Also, I hate to throw out the D word. You know what I mean? I think it's overused. but I don't know what it was, but it was certainly something that was not a pleasant experience.
Well, it's one of those things I think people forget. Even if it is, if you want to call it a human spirit, there's out there. Not all people are good.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
and I think that carries over with us. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think it's surprising when we're like, well, I can't believe that happened. It's like, well, not all people are good. And you know what? Maybe they don't want you around, or they're sick of you asking for them to prove themselves, or something like that. So,
fine, here, definitively, here's your proof.
Well, that's the question I started asking this summer, because it actually was something I got curious about. It was, if you're asking for proof, what is the level of proof that you get? I'll leave if you prove you're here.
Yep.
Because no one ever leaves. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'll take him, bro. Anytime. Sorry, brother. Yeah, I was outside.
Who was yelling at you?
This dude was driving by because I had a tree limb fall down the other night. he goes, "Hey, I know a tree guy." I'm like, "I'll take him." Like, okay. Like, Jesus.
Oh, that's wonderful. Josh Hurd.
I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. That's so great. That's wonderful, because I can barely hear him. I'm like, what's going on over there?
Small town Iowa at its finest.
There you go. Josh Hurd joining me on the haunting of KGGO.com. All right, so you start doing this stuff in college, and you're kind of one of the different people that this is kind of taken over your entire life, right? This is job number one for you at this point, right?
It really is. It's kind of weird to look at it like that, but yeah, I mean, this is what I do, isn't it?
I mean, you look at most people that come on this show, and it's nothing against them, but most everybody has a day job.
Right.
Not many people get to go around just, like you, go around lecture, get to go around and make movies, get to go around and work at a haunted house, which we'll get to Malvern here in a second, because I've got questions about that joint. But
sure.
At what point did it? Because I think it's interesting, because it kind of reminds me of like some of the guys that like do YouTube for a living. At some point there was a moment that you're like, you know what, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. What was that moment for you? Like, at what point was it? You know what, I want to make my life from the world of the paranormal? What was it for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I wrote a book about like that experience, about like Workmans Chapel. I wrote that book, and people seem to enjoy the book. Like, I'm not an author, I'm not a writer by any means, okay, but yeah, like, I've written 6 books, I get it, but like I still don't.
No, you're not a writer at all,
consider
Josh.
Myself, but I really don't consider myself to be, honestly, because I could be a lot better if I took the time to really like focus on that. But then like making the films, right?
Yeah.
And all of that, like, that's when I really got the creative bug in me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this could be fun. Like, we could really do this. And, made the first movie and then made a couple others. And I was like, oh my God. Now, the entire time that I was writing 6 books and I made like 6 documentary films at that time, like, I was still working at a school district,
Oh, really? I didn't know you were a teacher.
Yeah, not a teacher. I was what do they call them? An aide or a para educator or something like that. But yeah,
you don't even know what your title was at school.
No, I was just kind of showed up, honestly. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, look, this kid needs help with this. Okay, cool. Like, yeah,
all right, let's do it. No, it's just funny. So it was the movies that really got you to go, okay, this is it's time to just do this.
Yeah, really. It was kind of that weird leap of faith, that we all hopefully can take at some point in time in our life. And I was like, you know what? Like, if I don't do this right now, like, I'm going to be kicking myself in the butt in 20 years. I guarantee I will.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, just do it. I have a very supportive wife as well who was like, just do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, here we go. Like, off we go.
So what was the first movie about?
So the first movie was about Workman's Chapel, basically.
Okay.
Workman's Chapel was kind of the antagonist of the film itself. It's basically like that group, that original group, bringing them back to the chapel, because this has plagued us and just kind of like haunted our dreams ever since that night, right?
Yeah.
And bringing us back there just to finally give it one last middle finger and say, you're not in control of us anymore, and like we're gone. This is us like getting our closure, see you later type of thing, right? So With that, I mean, obviously with the film, we did another 4 consecutive nights doing all that fun stuff and actively trying to elicit a response, obviously, which seemed to work. That's great. I love experiments and all of that fun jazz, but there's a lot of weird stuff that happened with making the film itself. Like 24 hours before we were to begin filming, 75% of the crew quit.
Really?
Like, A Brush with Evil, that film was going to be a very cinematic looking documentary, right? It was going to be very beautiful. And what then turned out to just be, okay, well, now you not only have to run a camera, but we're also going to need you to run a boom mic, and we're going to need you to do this and that. Like, it became a very run and gun documentary, right? And so it's like, yeah, we got some cool B-roll shots, but it wasn't how I had originally pictured it. But like, even the first night of filming, for an example, we were scheduled to go to this place in Malvern, Iowa, that's called the Classic Cafe. And the Classic Cafe has its own slew of paranormal happenings. And they were nice enough to say, like, yeah, come on over and film, because I wanted to open up the film with us investigating. This is who we are. This is how we do our thing. And then just kind of open it up with a very broad stroke view of that.
Yeah.
And then kind of get into the meat and potatoes of everything. Well, there's a bar that's attached to the Classic Cafe, and this was a Friday evening.
Now you're talking.
It apparently had been a pretty rough week for a lot of people, because, man, like, they were loud, you know, and boisterous and all this. Like, we couldn't investigate at all. So night one was totally screwed. So I go outside, and I'm like smoking my angry cigarette, trying to come up with a plan B, right?
It's always the best.
I don't know what to do. And so, like, we ended up meeting this guy. This guy's outside in the little beer garden area. He's like, hey, man, what's with all the cameras? I'm like, oh, God.
How did you not say shooting a porno?
I thought about it, because I was like, anything at this point would be better than saying, hey, we're hunting for ghosts.
Yeah. Especially small town Iowa.
Exactly. I'm like, so this guy's either going to think I am caca duty crap crazy, or he is going to think that this is somewhat cool. And so I told him what we were doing. He was like, oh, man. He's like, you know, I find this stuff very interesting. He goes, I'm not really a believer myself. He goes, I own this building, and it's like 10,000 square feet. And he goes, it used to be a hotel, and then it was a nursing home, and then it was more of a group home for mentally handicapped people. And I'm like, where is this place? And he's like, oh, it's just right there across the street. I was like, oh, my God. Like, I think we just became best friends. You know, and so I'm like,
paranormal pants got really tight, is what you're saying.
It was amazing. And so it was funny because, like, quite literally, the first 10 minutes of A Brush with Evil that you watch is quite literally us then stumbling upon this gigantic building that we would then soon come to call Malvern Manor. The synchronicity in that is almost like I've completely stopped believing in coincidence. You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy to me how that all kind of worked out. So, yeah.
So you got involved with Malvern very early on then?
Yes.
Okay.
Like, Malvern was there, I mean, for the last 6 or 7 years now, basically, which is really weird to say. But, yeah, it's like 6 or 7 years.
How did you get because I'm guessing it didn't, start as, having so much. It sounded like you got a foot in the door, and then it grew into other things with Malvern. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was interesting because, like, I sat down with him. His name was Quincy, and I was like, man, I really don't think you understand what you have here. I'm like, there are buildings very similar to this around the country that have their doors open for people to come in at night and investigate, do tours during the day and all this. I'm like, I tell you what, I'm like, if you agree to this, because the building was sitting vacant, nobody had done anything with it. I'm like, he lived right next door to the place. So I'm like, how easy is this? I'm like, I will let these people in. I will collect money from them. I will take said money and I will run it right next door to you. This will be the easiest money you've ever made in your life. I get to basically have a paranormal laboratory at my disposal.
Yeah.
Right? And I can run fun experiments and all that. And then by word of mouth, hopefully this can grow and grow and grow. Obviously, like, getting then into the building, getting the keys to the building, I'm like a kid with a new toy, right? And so I kind of have to show off to my buddies a little bit, right? So I call my pal, Johnny Hauser from the Valska Axe Murder House, and I give him a ring. I was like, bro, you got to come over here. You got to check this place out. So he comes over. He then goes back into this area that we call the nursing home wing. And he is in the building maybe 20 minutes tops. I was out back because I'm like, you have fun. I'm just going to let the building speak for itself, right? He goes back there and gets bum rushed by this very tall shadow figure thing and is freaked out so much that he comes running out the back door. And he's like, that was intense. I don't know what the heck that was, but I'm like, yup. But then he said, I'm pretty sure then on the drive home, he called his buddy, Nick Groff, who used to be on, Ghost Adventures and all of that.
Yeah.
But had just started shooting a new show called Paranormal Lockdown. And so he called Nick and he's like, you need to get your butt to Iowa, like now. I got a text message that was like on Facebook Messenger or whatever from this guy claiming to be Nick Groff, asking about Malvern Manor and wanted to come and film there. And I thought it was a joke. And so I ignored him. And so then Johnny texts me. He's like, hey, did Nick ever get a hold of you? And I'm like, well, some dude claiming to be Nick did. He goes, no, that was really Nick. And you should probably answer him back. And I'm like, oh, okie doke.
Josh Hurd's what's wrong with that guy?
Apparently, right. Like, man. But then, obviously, Nick came and shot the show, and that really catapulted Malvern to the next level, being able to get in front of more eyes. And it's like now we've had people come from as far as Italy to stay just a night, at our place. It's insane. It's absolutely amazing.
That really is. It's such an interesting story. Josh Hurd joining me on the haunting of KGGO.com. More information about him and Malvern at joshhurd.net. Let's talk about some of the experiences there. I mean, it sounds like everywhere you've gone, you've had fairly good luck, or at least gone to places that do give you good luck.
Sure.
What I'm trying to think of because I don't ever want to ask like, hey, what's the scariest moment you ever had, But what are some of those memorable moments to you? Like when you think of Malvern and you're trying to explain to somebody, okay, this is why this place is haunted. What's the experience you tell them about?
I mean, obviously like the Shadow Man, like what Johnny had experienced, right? Like that's a big one for me. That's happened to me 5 times personally. But only 5 times, right? Like I've been there for how many years now, and it's only happened to me 5 times. Now I'm not actively pursuing it either because it's terrifying when it happens. But
let me ask you real quick though, with that, when a Shadow Man when that does happen on one of those 5 times, it just comes at you. You see it out of the corner of your eye. What's the experience like?
Basically, like you walk down into what we call that nursing home wing, and it's basically like you're coming to a T intersection on a road. Okay. You have a very long stretch of hallway to your left and a very long stretch of hallway to your right, and then looking down towards the left, basically, there's a very long, dark hallway, but all the way down the hall on the right-hand side is room number 2. And a very tall, very dark, like black humanoid figure will come out of room 2. He will turn and then run at you. Now, here's where it gets fascinating to me, just because I'm very analytical again. Like, it's, number one, it's scaring the crap out of people because of the motion itself. Like, it's not a very natural motion. Like, it's traveling the distance of roughly 40 feet in less than a second. So your response is very, very carnal. When this happens, it's a very fight or flight type of thing. Now, what's interesting though, is the second that you flinch or you duck and cover, wet yourself, what have you, this phenomenon is done. It is done and over with. Nobody is getting hit or scratched or punched or any of that crap, right? Yeah. It's quite literally just observing this phenomenon in motion. So to me, that may indicate something that's like residual, right? Something on playback, right? Interestingly enough, it was the day after Paranormal Lockdown aired. One of the nurses that used to work there that I've kind of since befriended, she got a hold of me and she said the gentleman that occupied that room was 6'7", nonverbal, mentally deranged. He had killed a few people in the past. Oh, wow. But his little claim to fame, I guess, was that like whenever they were doing, I guess, call it bed checks or what have you, he would come out of that room and he would chase the nursing staff. Now that fascinated me because obviously we're observing similar behaviors here. So again, maybe something residual in nature. And now I've been trying for God knows how long to correlate data and figure out what is the antecedent of this haunting, whether it be a time of day, a weather pattern, a moon phase. Like, we're trying everything, but we have no idea why this actually occurs.
It wouldn't be just a trick of light, right?
Absolutely not. So in fact, like, because that was initially where my brain went as well. I'm like, okay, if a car passes in the back alley at just the right moment or what have you, this could possibly maybe create something like that. So now I've blacked out all the windows, right? So it's now very dark back there. And what's fascinating is you're also able then to still observe this phenomenon when it's happening. So take your standard definition of being in the dark and now add this weird layer to it that's in a humanoid form, and that's now running at you. It sucks. This happened. It is terrible. So here's my thing then. So because I wanted to see, okay, now what happens if we don't react, right? What happens if we do not run, we do not flinch, we just quite literally stand there and let this happen? What would happen to us physically? And I've tried this. And I stood back there. One evening, I had the entire building to myself. It was roughly 2:00 in the morning, and I'm begging for this to happen. I had been begging for about 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
And finally it does happen. Now I didn't run like I normally would, right? I didn't run this time, but I still flinched, which ultimately really makes me mad because now I realize I have to do this experiment over again, like whenever I get the guts enough to do it. But it's fascinating to me, like how this all happened.
You know what? It just kind of cropped up on my mind. I wonder if you could fool it. I wonder if you could set up like a mannequin.
Yep.
With cameras and, maybe a couple, audio recording and that sort of thing, and see if you can get it and see what happens.
Absolutely.
Let me guess, you already did it.
Absolutely. No, but I've had similar thoughts, right? Like I want to do something like that. The issue that I'm coming into now is, and of course every ghost show that you see on TV would probably tell you the same thing, but pointing a camera also seems to just kind of like nothing ever happens on camera.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, right? Now, obviously, we get some really cool stuff every once in a while, little anomalous things here and there. Yeah. Like no ghost is just coming out of the door and, hey, how you doing? I'm going to shake your hand. That's ultimately, that would be amazing. That would be amazing if that could happen.
Ray, it's staring at me.
Interesting. So I start looking, right, exactly. And so I start looking at things like, things in like physics, right? Specifically like quantum mechanics and all this stuff. Like when they were doing like the double slit experiment, for example, and firing all these particles and all that stuff. And the particles would change behavior when they were being observed. And I was like, I wonder if that's not something similar to what's happening with us over here, like on this, in the whole like paranormal community. It's like we're trying so hard to observe it, and therefore we're also shooting ourselves in the foot.
What about this? Here's two things I just thought of.
Mm-hmm.
What if you blindfolded yourself?
Yeah, buddy.
Same thing. You're there. You're a live person in this situation. You're just blindfolded.
Yes.
So you're there, but you're not technically observing.
Correct.
Correct.
No, that's a great idea.
I mean, just a thought.
Absolutely.
But
no, I like it. I like the idea. The closest I've come to that was I've done this to a couple people now, but I took my buddy, I've done this to my buddy Johnny Hauser. I put him in one of our wheelchairs that we have there.
Yeah.
And I tied him to the wheelchair and then I blindfolded him as well. And I parked the wheelchair right next to room 2, right in the middle of the hallway.
Yeah.
Right. And, I had him act as if he were, like just kind of a disgruntled resident, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And wanting to get out of there. It's like, I'm getting out of here. I'm hopping on the train. Who's coming with me? You know what I mean? Like all this stuff. And I would come down there and simulate kind of being an orderly or what have you and be like, Hauser, that's enough out of you. All this stuff. But like trying to do as much as we possibly can to even recreate, because even like walking up and down the halls with like a clipboard and knocking on doors and saying like, oh, it's, bed check or time for medication or something like that does seem to get a response back there. So I don't know. Like, we still have a long way to go with this. But I'm
it kind of
interested
sounds
to see
like
what
one
happens.
of those. Excuse me. It kind of sounds like one of those things where when you believe in something, it makes it real. Have you ever heard those theories?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like a tulpa. Like you're basically
Yeah.
speaking or thinking or wishing something into existence.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're empowering it. So
Exactly.
interesting stuff. Josh Hurd joining me on the line. By the way, if I ever do go there, there's not a chance in hell you would tie me up. Johnny Hauser is way more trusting than I would ever be with anybody.
Yeah, he's a good buddy. I'm telling you.
But
he's very understanding.
He deserves it. Let's be honest.
That's true. He's got it coming to him.
All right, Josh, let me ask you this, because you brought up an interesting thing. Nothing ever presents itself on video, or, you get the random EVP and stuff, so, sometimes. Let me ask you this. If you're going, and it doesn't have to be like a scary thing or demon or whatever, but if you were going to sit down with someone that's a non-believer, what's the one piece of evidence that you would either play for them or show them to say, okay, now tell me this stuff doesn't exist?
Yeah. I mean, it would kind of depend on if they were looking for a ghost, if they were looking for a UFO.
You can do either.
We've got really cool pieces of evidence. I know, like sitting down, like with Alney, for an example, my buddy Seth, right? Our buddy Seth, what we filmed out there at Van Meter was up in the sky, and we couldn't explain it, and it just kept happening. And like looking at, different radar and things like that, it's like, okay, well, there's no planes. There's certainly not a satellite. That's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is that? And being able to capture it on film, that was interesting. And then, I mean, a couple of years back, I was out in the middle of the woods. I was put there by myself, and there was supposed claims of like Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever, which I, at that time, didn't believe in. I was like, everybody would always ask, hey, what do you think of Bigfoot? I'm like, never met the dude. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Because like, I thought it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then I'd have these these weren't just like rocks or anything, like these were stones, and they were being like chucked at my head. And it got to a point where I realized, I'm like, they're missing me on purpose, right? Almost like a warning shot. But you're getting these things thrown at you, and they're landing just behind your feet and just to the side of you. It's like, this is terrifying. And then you're smelling what smells like wet dog and garbage. It was nasty.
Okay.
And I'm like, this is crazy. And like the growling and all of this stuff coming together. I thought I was going to die out there. I thought, okay, like my death will at least be on camera, I guess.
This is how it ends for Josh Hurd.
This is it. This is how I check out. I'm like, well, I guess I've had a good enough run. Whatever. We'll see like what happens here. But yeah, man. So it's like, I've got really cool pieces of evidence. I've got doors opening and closing. I've got, disembodied voices here and there. I've got all of these weird anomalies that are on camera. I've got some really cool evidence of a camera that was setting up. It was in the Valska axe murder house and setting up right at the top of the steps, shooting down this little hallway into the kids' room. And you can quite clearly hear us downstairs, making our sophomoric jokes and all of that fun stuff, as we like to do. And the camera was just rolling, doing its thing. And you see this little attic door or crawl space area door open.
Weird.
And then you see three very interesting things after that, because it's like three little, I call them blips, but it's like 1, 2, 3 come out of this closet. And they're just tall, straight. There's no real shape to them at all. And they come out, and they're gone for like, I think it was like 4 minutes or something like that, something close to 4 minutes. And then you see 1, 2, 3 of these little blips go back into the closet, and then the closet door shuts. And I mean, it was maybe 2 hours later before we went upstairs and collected that camera. We had zero clue that any of this was going on, but it was amazing to see this,
I've heard more, Valska especially, I've heard more stories from people saying stories like that, where it's, we left the camera on or we left the recorder on, and we had no idea we had this until we got back.
Yep. And that's kind of what makes it worthwhile, right? Is you're listening to like hours of audio and hours of video for those few seconds worth of just really, really cool things that you can't explain away.
There was an EVP that a buddy of mine sent me, and he, long story short, since I work with audio, he was asking if I could clean something up and give him my opinion on something.
Oh yeah.
And he sent me one of the most frightening things I've ever heard. And it was from Valska, and it was one of those things where I called him back and I'm like, what is this? And he goes, we didn't know we had it. I wanted you to give me your opinion. I'm like, I always have to run things through. Could I make this?
Sure.
And could I make this? Probably. Would it be hard? Absolutely.
Right.
So, that's interesting about Valska. I wonder why that is.
I've talked to Johnny numerous times about it, and he's like, honestly, he goes, I don't even know if it's an actual ghost haunting that place.
Really?
He goes, I think it's just the house itself. And I'm like, that's interesting, because like Malvern is very similar in the sense that it seems like the building already knows what you're going to do before you do it. It's about 5 steps ahead of you at all times. It's like they already know what we're up to before we even do it.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I think it's one of those things where I think buildings are kind of that metaphorical sponge. They soak up what's around them.
Yeah.
It's the same thought as of what makes a house a home.
Exactly.
So I don't know.
And I think that's kind of like, that's usually what I chalk up, what merits a haunting or whatever. And I always go back to that place being so many different things and having so many bits of traumatic experience happen within the walls themselves. And at the end of the day, it's like whether you're a resident there and whether you get along with the dude across the hall, you're still waking up together, you're going to bed roughly the same time, you're eating your meals together. Like there's camaraderie in that, right? There's family in that. And the only sense of, I don't know, normalcy in what could only be described as probably a very chaotic life anyway, not your stereotypical life. And I think that's why it's like that was home for them for sure.
Josh Hurd joining me on the haunting of KGGO.com. As we start getting towards the end here, got a couple more questions, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what you have coming up here in the future. But let me ask you this. It kind of similar to if you were going to convince somebody of this stuff. I've never asked this question, but you brought up like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts. Yeah. Say there is a skeptic, and you had to prove to them that one of those 3 exist. What's the one you could most easily go, there's something to this?
Yeah. I mean, probably the ghost aspect of everything.
Okay.
And being able to like be so familiar with a building like Malvern that I could take them into that building and I could be like, here, sit right here for 1 hour. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm out of here. I'm totally gone. Here's the keys to the place. It's locked up. It's just you. And see what happens in an hour. See what happens in 3 hours. Like I really enjoy when skeptics come to the manor. Like they're more of that skeptical mind, which I think is very important. Like to have that.
And I should probably rephrase, not exactly prove to them, but at least shift them from, I don't believe this at all, to I'm willing to listen to more. So it would
absolutely
be the ghost side for you.
I think so. For me, it would be, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about, what is the weirdest UFO experience you've had?
Oh, man. So, again,
there was this time.
Dude, I tell you, this was like right in your friggin' stomping grounds too, because like me and my buddy Dave, we're filming this documentary about what we call the Spook Light phenomenon, right?
What's that?
And it's basically just like a series of like it's like a disembodied ball of light.
Okay.
That will just float and just do its thing. Now, this is one of those phenomenon that have been reported for hundreds and hundreds of years that I think is so grossly overlooked because everybody in every show is always after like the bigger, better, nastier demon type thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I really want to explore this and see, because there was one really cool thing. Like we were in the Brown Mountains in North Carolina. We're hiking, filming all this stuff, but hiking nonetheless. And they said that there was this ball of light that came up to a father and son that were out there. And this ball of light stops right in front of them, goes around them, and then continues on basically the same path. I'm like, well, that would almost suggest some form of intelligence.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm like, man, but so Dave and I were out, and we were in, I'm trying to remember the name. It was right outside of Des Moines. It was right close to Des Moines, Iowa.
What direction out of Des Moines?
I'm trying to even remember that, like what this place was called. But anyway, so we're out there, we're filming our stuff, and there was a spook light phenomenon or whatever that had been reported for 100 years or whatever. And we're out there, and nothing was happening. Obviously, we're sitting in lawn chairs doing nothing. You know what I mean? Like, this is all we know what to do. And we're looking up, and there was something in the sky. Like, there was no like running lights, or there was no lights whatsoever, but you could still very clearly see this craft. It looked more triangular in shape, I would say, but this thing was pretty big, especially for as high up as it was. But what really floored me was the amount of speed that it had behind it. I mean, we're talking horizon to horizon in less than a minute. It was moving very, very fast. Certainly faster than anything that I had ever seen. Now, could that have potentially been something within our government that we just don't know about? Abso-frickin-lutely. Of course it could. But it was very, very odd to me. Like, this was very big and moving very fast.
So you went looking for one phenomena and you got something completely different.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's exactly what happened with the Bigfoot phenomenon too, because we wanted to readdress this. And so we did a film called Into the Light Part 2. And that's what took us to Arkansas, which is also then what took us into apparently Bigfoot country. Like, it was ridiculous. This guy was walking us around this area and talking about Bigfoot. And I was literally laughing. I was laughing at this guy because I didn't believe him. Oh my gosh, man. It was nuts. It was absolutely crazy.
Josh Hurd joining me on the hauntingofkggo.com. You've got a ton of movies out. You said you got 6 books, I believe. What's kind of next for you? What's kind of in the works? What's going on? I know things have been affected because of COVID, much like The Haunting has. But what's kind of next for you, Josh?
I've definitely got a couple things going right now. I'm in the process of editing a new documentary that I hope to have out by March. And then also, of course, we have this new video podcast thing that we call G Crew. And the G Crew is Johnny Hauser, Nick Groff, Chad Lindbergh from like Fast and the Furious and Supernatural, and then myself, just sitting around talking about literally everything. And we interview people in the paranormal. We interview people that are just musicians, athletes, all sorts of fun stuff. So, I mean, just the different things that kind of interest us, and we just sit around and talk shop. I mean, we just had a fun little interview the other night with Stormy Daniels, for God's sake. You know, we're going to have that episode coming out soon. Yeah, she was over at the Manor for a little bit. So yeah,
that's interesting. Okay, what's the on that show? Can people find information on your website on that, or? So
G Crew is it's a Patreon only show right now.
Okay,
I do know that we're talking here that it will be on YouTube. We're also literally just set this up last night, but we're going to have just the audio version of everything, like on iTunes or anywhere that you can get a podcast. Hopefully within the next week it should be out, but yeah.
Okay.
For free. I should say for free.
Well, either way, I'll get the links from you. We'll put them at the bottom of the page for this. But in doing these shows, what's the one story that blew you away? Like you were like, holy, at the end of it.
In doing the...
Like when you have guests on and stuff, because I always think... small thing about me when I do interviews and I think it's going well, I'll ask people about their paranormal stuff, and hearing some of these different rock stars and people talk about this, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, that's crazy,
Right.
What's the
like,
one
honestly,
what's the one that blew you away?
Man, I tell you, there's so many. Like we sat down, with Ryan Buell from Paranormal State. And Ryan obviously had a long history with like drug abuse and all of this, and he was on a very, very bad path. But then talking with him, and now he's started to changed his life around, right?
Okay.
And he's going to school now to become a drug counselor. Like, he's trying to help people that were in the same position he was just a few years ago. That was one of the more poignant type stories, I guess, that really hit me, you know, as like a big one. We talked to the family in Colorado. They had lost their son to COVID, and he was actually only 21 years old. This was when we thought it only affected older people, really, but he was a college baseball player, and this made like national news and all that stuff. But we interviewed them, and Nick actually went out to their house.
Oh, wow.
And it was interesting because they were telling this beautiful story of their son, and, you know, at the exact same time, like, Nick was also investigating, you know, because that's what they wanted, because there was a lot of weird things, I guess, that were happening around their house. And so Nick is there, and he's getting some very interesting responses, calling them by their nicknames that he would have for them and all of this stuff. It was a beautiful thing, you know. It's like you have the paranormal aspect of everything, sure, but then at the same time you're giving this family closure.
Yeah.
And just, oh man, like, that was one of those episodes that really kind of tugged at your heartstrings, for sure.
All right, Josh. Well, hey, we appreciate it so much, you coming on the show today. We'll have a link to your social pages, YouTube, all of that at the bottom of the page. Happy Halloween to you. Thank you so much.
You as well.
We wish you nothing but the best, man.
Oh, thanks you, brother. Appreciate it.